Welcome back, everybody. Today, we're going to be taking a deep dive
Yeah.
into a pretty critical communication pathway in your cells.
It's called the JAK-STAT pathway.
The JAK-STAT pathway.
And you've got some really interesting sources on this.
I do, yeah. And they focus on how it works within the immune system. So,
Perfect.
yeah, let's get to it.
Sounds good.
So before we break down all the nitty-gritty details,
Yeah.
can you give us, the high-level overview? Why is this pathway important? Why should we even care about it?
It's fascinating because it's kind of like the central control hub for a lot of your body's response to both infection and inflammation.
Okay.
So understanding how it works is going to be crucial for understanding how your body fights off diseases.
Okay, so this is kind of like a big deal then.
Yeah, this is a big deal.
If this pathway is messed up,
Yeah, and how things can go wrong,
yeah,
which lead to inflammatory diseases.
got it. So it's like a domino effect.
Exactly.
One thing leads to another, and if there's a glitch in the JAK-STAT pathway, it can really mess things up.
That's exactly right. And that's why researchers are so interested in it, because knowing the ins and outs of this pathway has opened doors for developing targeted treatments for those diseases.
That's really promising. So let's break down how this pathway actually works.
Okay.
What's the first step?
Okay, so imagine your cells as these bustling cities that are constantly receiving messages from the outside world.
Okay.
In this scenario, cytokine receptors are like antennas on the rooftops,
Right.
picking up signals from cytokines, which are like those important messages.
So cytokines are like the messengers and the receptors are the ones receiving the message.
That's right. And these cytokines are released by other cells to communicate with each other, especially during an immune response.
So what happens when a cytokine binds to its receptor? Does it just sit there?
No, not at all.
Okay.
It sets off this whole chain reaction, think of it as an alarm system.
Okay.
When a cytokine binds to its receptor, it triggers the activation of what we call JAK-kinases.
JAK-kinases. What are those?
They're enzymes that are always hanging out near those cytokine receptors, just waiting for their cue to act.
So they're just waiting there doing nothing.
Exactly. When the cytokine binds, they're like security guards springing into action.
Oh, okay.
Ready to defend the city.
Okay, I'm picturing these JAK-kinases like guards getting a signal to mobilize.
Yes.
What do they do next?
They get to work. Their main job is to add phosphate groups, like little tags, to specific spots on the cytokine receptors.
So it's like they're marking the receptors with a signal.
Exactly. Those phosphate tags are like signal flares calling in the next wave of responders, the STAT proteins.
And who are these STAT proteins? What's their role in all of this?
STAT proteins are like special agents that have the power to enter the city's control center.
Okay.
The nucleus.
Oh, the nucleus.
Change things up.
Oh, so they're the ones that can actually go in and change how the cell is functioning.
Precisely.
Okay.
But they need those phosphate tags from the JAK-kinases to get access to the nucleus.
So they can't get in without them.
Without those tags, they're stuck in the cytoplasm, waiting in the lobby.
So it's like those phosphate tags are their VIP passes to get into the control center.
That's a great analogy. So once they bind to the tag receptors, the JAK-kinases then add phosphate tags to the STAT proteins as well.
So they get tagged too?
Yes, exactly. Now they're activated and ready to pair up, forming dimers, and head straight to the nucleus.
Dimer?
Yes.
Yeah, so like a power couple ready to make some changes.
Exactly. Once inside the nucleus, these STAT dimers find specific DNA sequences near genes that control the immune response.
Okay.
They bind to these sequences and flip the switches on those genes, turning them on or off. This is how they actually change the cell's behavior.
Wow. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
So it's like a carefully orchestrated relay race.
Yes.
The cytokine sends the message, the JAK-kinases pass the baton to the STAT proteins, and then the STAT proteins go on to activate or deactivate specific genes to fight the infection.
That's a perfect way to describe it. And it's this precise regulation that allows our bodies to mount such a complex and effective immune response.
This is all starting to make sense now, but we've been talking about a lot of players. Can we recap who's who in this JAK-STAT pathway?
Absolutely. We have cytokine receptors, which are like antennas picking up signals from cytokines.
Right.
Then there are the JAK-kinases, our security guards, adding those crucial phosphate tags.
Yep.
And finally, the STAT proteins, our special agents, are activated by those tags and go on to regulate gene expression in the nucleus.
Got it.
Yeah.
And all of this is happening super fast, right?
You're absolutely right. The JAK-STAT pathway is known for its speed and efficiency.
Okay.
It's like a high-speed communication network within cells, ensuring a rapid response to infection.
This has been really helpful in understanding the basics of the JAK-STAT pathway, but I have a question.
Sure.
You mentioned earlier that sometimes things can go wrong with this pathway.
Yeah.
How does that happen, and what are the consequences?
That's a great question.
Okay.
Let's dive into that next.
All right.
We've seen how this pathway works when everything's running smoothly, but
Yeah.
imagine what happens when those signals get mixed up.
Yeah, I'm all ears. Let's uncover what happens when the JAK-STAT pathway goes off the rails.
Okay, think of it this way.
Okay.
Too much activity in the JAK-STAT pathway is like having an overzealous security system.
Okay.
It starts triggering alarms even when there's no real threat,
Oh,
leading to unnecessary inflammation and damage.
so it's like the immune system attacking its own body.
Exactly.
Oh, wow.
This is what happens in many autoimmune diseases.
Okay.
The JAK-STAT pathway becomes hyperactive, leading to an immune response that attacks the body's own tissues.
That sounds pretty serious.
Yeah, it can be.
What about the opposite scenario? What if the pathway isn't active enough?
That's like having a security system that's completely asleep on the job.
Oh, okay.
When a real threat appears, it fails to raise the alarm,
Okay.
leaving the city vulnerable to invaders.
So in that case, the body wouldn't be able to fight off infections effectively.
Precisely. A weakened immune response can make someone more susceptible to infections and diseases.
Wow, so it's all about finding that perfect balance, right?
Yeah.
Too much activity or too little activity in the JAK-STAT pathway can lead to problems.
Exactly. And that's why understanding how to modulate this pathway is so important for developing new treatments.
This is fascinating. So how are researchers using this knowledge to develop those targeted treatments? What are they aiming for?
That's a great question, and it's what makes this research so exciting.
Yeah.
Imagine you could develop a drug that could either calm down an overactive JAK-STAT pathway or boost a sluggish one.
That would be incredible.
Yeah, it would.
So are researchers trying to create drugs that can directly target those JAK kinases or STAT proteins we talked about earlier?
That's exactly what they're doing. They're developing drugs that can either inhibit those overactive JAK kinases, essentially calming down the immune response, or enhance the activity of STAT proteins to boost the immune system.
So it's like they're creating tools that can fine-tune the volume on the JAK-STAT pathway.
That's a great way to put it.
Wow.
And these targeted therapies hold immense promise for treating a wide range of conditions, from autoimmune diseases to cancer.
This is all incredibly fascinating, and I'm eager to learn more about these potential treatments.
Okay.
But before we move on, can you remind me how this JAK-STAT pathway relates to what we were talking about earlier with the cardiomyocytes and signaling microdomains?
Ah, yes. Remember how we discussed how the same signaling pathway can have different effects depending on its location within a cell?
Right.
Well, while our focus today is on the canonical JAK-STAT mechanism, there's definitely a possibility that similar principles of localized signaling could be at play within the JAK-STAT pathway as well.
So are you saying that different cytokine receptors might trigger slightly different responses, even though they're all activating the same JAK-STAT pathway?
That's a very insightful observation. It's possible that different cytokines might activate different combinations of JAK kinases or STAT proteins, leading to subtle but important variations in the downstream effects.
So even though they're all using the same JAK-STAT highway, they might be taking different exits,
Yes,
leading to slightly different destinations.
that's a fantastic analogy.
Wow.
This possibility adds another layer of complexity to this already intricate pathway, highlighting the incredible precision and control mechanisms that cells have evolved.
This has been a truly eye-opening exploration of the JAK-STAT pathway.
Good.
We've covered so much ground, from the basic mechanism to the consequences of dysregulation and the potential for targeted therapies.
It's been a pleasure delving into the intricacies of this essential signaling pathway with you.
Yeah, this has been awesome.
And it's exciting to think about the future of research in this area and the potential for new discoveries that can improve human health.
I completely agree. This deep dive has given me a whole new appreciation for the complexity and elegance of cellular communication, and I can't wait to explore the next layer of this fascinating topic.
It really is remarkable
Right.
how much we're learning about these cellular processes.
Mhm.
And the more we understand,
Yeah.
the more we can target treatments for diseases.
So let's talk more about those targeted treatments.
Okay.
We touched on how researchers are developing drugs that can either inhibit J kinases
Right.
or enhance STAT protein activity.
Yeah.
Can you give me
Mhm.
some specific examples of how these drugs work?
Absolutely. Let's start with JAK inhibitors.
Okay.
These drugs work by blocking the activity of JAK kinases, essentially putting a brake on the signaling cascade.
So it's like they're cutting the communication line between the cytokine receptor and the STAT proteins.
That's a great way to think about it.
Mm-hmm.
By inhibiting JAK-kinases,
Yeah.
these drugs can dampen the immune response, which is particularly helpful in conditions where the immune system is overreacting, like in rheumatoid arthritis
Oh, okay.
or psoriasis.
That makes sense.
Oh.
So instead of the immune system attacking the body's own tissues, these JAK inhibitors can help to calm things down.
Exactly.
Okay.
And the exciting thing is that these JAK inhibitors have shown significant efficacy in treating these conditions, often providing relief when other treatments have failed.
That's really promising.
Yeah.
But what about those drugs that enhance STAT protein activity?
Okay.
How do those work?
Those are a bit more complex.
Okay.
Instead of directly targeting STAT proteins, these drugs often focus on modulating other molecules that influence STAT activity.
So it's like they're indirectly tweaking the STAT protein's performance.
Precisely. For example, some drugs might target enzymes that remove those crucial phosphate tags from STAT proteins,
Okay.
essentially prolonging their activity.
So by keeping those phosphate tags on for longer,
Yes.
they're giving the STAT proteins more time to do their job in the nucleus.
Exactly. This approach is being explored in cancer treatment,
All right.
where the goal is to boost the immune system's ability to recognize and destroy cancer cells.
This is all incredibly fascinating. It seems like there are so many different ways to manipulate the JAK-STAT pathway for therapeutic benefit.
Right.
It makes you realize how powerful these cellular mechanisms are.
It really does.
Wow.
And it highlights the importance of continued research in this area.
Right.
The more we learn about the intricacies of the JAK-STAT pathway, the more we can fine-tune our therapeutic strategies.
It's amazing to think that we're able to develop drugs that can target such specific molecules within cells.
Mm-hmm.
It's like having microscopic tools to repair and fine-tune our biological machinery.
It's a testament to the ingenuity of scientists and their dedication to improving human health.
Right.
And it's a reminder that even the most complex biological processes can be understood and manipulated
Yeah.
with the right knowledge and tools.
Speaking of complex processes, I remember earlier you mentioned that there might be subtle variations
Yes.
in how different cytokine receptors activate the JAK-STAT pathway.
Mhm.
Could you elaborate on that a bit more?
Absolutely.
I'm curious about those different exits on the JAK-STAT highway.
Let's imagine two different cytokines. Let's call them cytokine A and cytokine B.
Okay.
Both of these cytokines bind to their respective receptors and activate the JAK-STAT pathway.
So far, so good.
Right.
They're both using the same pathway.
But here's where it gets interesting.
Okay.
Cytokine A might preferentially activate JAK kinase 1 and STAT protein 1,
Okay.
while cytokine B might favor JAK kinase 2 and STAT protein 2.
So even though they're both triggering the JAK-STAT pathway, they're activating slightly different players within that pathway.
Precisely. And this subtle difference in activation can lead to distinct downstream effects.
So what kind of distinct effects are we talking about?
Well, remember how STAT proteins bind to specific DNA sequences to regulate gene expression?
Right.
Different STAT proteins have different DNA binding preferences.
So if different cytokines activate different STAT proteins, they might end up regulating different sets of genes.
Exactly. This means that cytokine A, by activating STAT protein 1, might trigger the expression of genes involved in, say, antiviral responses,
Okay.
while cytokine B, by activating STAT protein 2, might promote genes involved in, let's say, inflammatory responses.
So it's like they're both sending signals through the JAK-STAT pathway,
Right?
but they're using different codes to convey slightly different messages.
That's a fantastic way to visualize it. This nuanced control allows for a more tailored immune response,
Yeah.
ensuring that the body's defenses are appropriately calibrated to the specific challenge it's facing.
This adds a whole new layer of complexity and sophistication to the JAK-STAT pathway.
Right.
It's amazing to think that even seemingly subtle variations in activation can lead to such significant differences in the immune response.
It really highlights the elegance and precision of cellular signaling mechanisms.
Wow.
And it underscores the importance of understanding these nuances when developing targeted therapies.
This has been an incredibly insightful deep dive into the JAK-STAT pathway. We've covered a lot of ground, from the basic mechanism to the potential for targeted treatments and the fascinating subtleties of how different cytokine receptors can fine-tune the immune response.
It's been a pleasure exploring these complexities with you.
Yeah, it has been.
And I think it's safe to say that the JAK-STAT pathway is a prime example of how understanding cellular communication can unlock new possibilities for treating diseases.
I completely agree. This episode has definitely given me a deeper appreciation for the power and complexity of cellular signaling.
Good.
I'm eager to see what the future holds for research in this area and how these discoveries will translate into new therapies for patients.
It's a rapidly evolving field, and
Hmm.
the pace of discovery is truly exciting.
Yeah, it really is.
And it all stems from that fundamental curiosity
Uh-huh.
about how our cells communicate and coordinate their actions.
It's like we've been zooming in on this intricate world within our bodies,
Right.
seeing all these molecular players interacting and orchestrating these complex processes. It makes you realize just how much is going on beneath the surface, keeping us healthy and functioning.
It really does.
Yeah, and it's a reminder that there's always more to explore,
Yeah,
more layers to peel back, and more to learn about the incredible complexity of life.
absolutely.
Well, I think we've definitely peeled back some fascinating layers today.
We have.
We started with a broad overview of the JAK-STAT pathway,
Uh-huh.
then delved into the specific roles of the JAK kinases and STAT proteins, and even explored how different cytokine receptors can fine-tune the immune response.
It's been a comprehensive deep dive, and you've clearly grasped the key concepts.
I have to give credit to you and those amazing sources you provided.
Oh, well, thank you.
They were so insightful and well-written.
Good, I'm glad.
I feel like I've gained a whole new level of understanding about how this pathway works and why it's so important for our health.
I'm glad to hear that. It's always rewarding to see someone engage with these complex topics and appreciate the beauty and elegance of cellular signaling.
It's truly fascinating.
It is.
And it makes you appreciate the incredible research that's being done to develop new treatments that target this pathway.
Yeah,
It's like we're on the cusp of a new era of medicine where we can precisely manipulate these molecular pathways to treat a wide range of diseases.
I completely agree. The future of medicine is bright, and I'm confident that our understanding of cellular communication will continue to drive innovation and lead to groundbreaking therapies that improve human health.
Well, on that optimistic note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive.
Okay.
It's been an incredible journey into the world of the JAK-STAT pathway, and I feel like I've learned so much.
It's been a pleasure exploring this fascinating pathway with you.
And to our listeners, we hope this deep dive has sparked your curiosity about the intricate world of cellular communication.
Yes,
Remember, there's always more to learn, more to discover, and more to question.
that's right.
Until next time, keep those sources coming, and we'll keep diving deeper into the fascinating world of knowledge.